Hey, welcome to another episode, and today's episode is, I feel, a juicy subject. I also feel it is quite an emotive subject. The sheer mention of the TLA, the three-letter acronym, KPI, sends shivers down some people's spines. And I think within the recruitment industry, there is a degree of trauma out there as to how people feel about KPIs, having been on the receiving end of poor quality management who misappropriated the purpose of what a KPI is designed to do. So hopefully you can tell already by my tone, I'm a big fan of KPIs. I'm a big fan of KPIs that are meaningful. I'm a big fan of KPIs that help people to improve their productivity, to help them to be able to review their performance. Because after all, the middle letter in the acronym, P, is for performance. And let's not forget that the last letter in the acronym is I for indicator. It is an indicator of a performance. It is not the performance itself. We are not celebrating the achievement of the KPI. We are looking at the KPI to help us to understand how well are we performing and what, if anything, could we do that may help us to improve the quality of that performance and therefore create a better experience for our customers. Now, I know that there are recruitment business owners out there who started their recruitment agency having left a business where perhaps they got a bit too beasted by some manager who was using a KPI like it was some sort of mace to hit them over the head. And because of that, they've recoiled at the idea of having KPIs. I know that there are business owners out there today who don't have KPIs, and they claim to have an environment that encourages people to be grown-ups, that encourages autonomy and allows people to work how they want, when they want, from wherever they want. And fair play to them, right? If that's how you wish to run your business, that's your choice. What I do know is there are business owners out there who quietly regret some of that, particularly as the market has become more challenging. Everything's fine when it's booming. You don't really need to be tracking anything when the jobs are rolling towards you. You think about those technology companies who had exponential rates of growth, and therefore the agencies that supplied them had similar rates of growth themselves. They didn't need a KPI to tell them there's shitloads of jobs out there. Candidates are really hard to find, so if we just get good at finding candidates, we're going to make money. And the only sales pitch we need is, hey, I've got a candidate. And they were kind of in. Things have shifted. Now there is a bit more of a challenge that revolves around onboarding customers. Now the shoe is on the other foot because there are businesses out there who are getting an influx of direct applicants and are now questioning, why do we need a recruiter? Because they've been conditioned over the last 4 years that recruiters find CVs. And now that they can find their own CVs, why do we need a recruiter? So the recruiters kind of shot themselves in the foot because they never had the right sales message to really embed way beyond the transaction of finding a CV. This is how we add value to your business. And some of those companies are struggling. And they're struggling in two ways. They're struggling because of the market. They're also struggling because of their lack of adoption of KPIs. And now as business owners trying to find a way to introduce to a collective of people who apparently are adults, apparently have the autonomy to be able to work how they want, when they want, from where they want, they just seem to be struggling to produce anything that we would describe as being results because there's a lack of focus on performance, because performance isn't truly being tracked. And there was a really interesting update that was shared on LinkedIn by a business owner from Birmingham talking about actual adverts. So he screenshotted adverts, and in the adverts, even today, adverts saying no stupid KPIs, no ridiculous hours. This pride that a business has in basically saying, we're not really going to track anything that one would describe as being meaningful. It is totally up to you to go solo and make sure that you are doing the right things to the right standards at the right moment without any method of being able to measure that being introduced to you by the business. Which sounds like it is self-employment with a salary. It sounds as though it is the worst of both worlds. But hey, it will attract a certain profile of person. And I know that there are people out there who will say, Yeah, but Jeremy, I don't like to be micromanaged. Cool. Then don't get micromanaged. But my real sentiment when people say that is, I think what you mean is you don't like to be managed. Forget about being micromanaged. It's very difficult to find someone who talks about micromanagement and can actually describe the difference between micromanagement and management. They just don't like to be managed. And they don't like to be managed because they don't like people actually looking at how they are doing what they're doing. And they prefer to be left to do what they know they can do. And it just makes life more difficult for the business owner and way more difficult for that consultant, because some of them end up becoming a little bit bitter and a little bit twisted and start to become resentful of their own job because they're not producing the results. And just to compound my perceptions of that, as I was reading that update from that business owner sharing the screenshots of those job adverts, another agency owner joined in the chat and quite proudly said that actually KPIs and tracking things that are designed to help somebody to get better actually is quite off-putting for the consultant, and went on to say there are very few things that are meaningful KPIs, and if you employ grown-ups then they should be able to do their job properly. And as I was reading that person's comment, the serendipity of it, right, into my inbox on LinkedIn came a message from a consultant who works for that business, a sales message, so treating me as a client. So clearly doesn't have a very good picture of who their avatar is. Despite the fact that they work in marketing recruitment, they are targeting me as a two-person business seeking to be able to develop business, ultimately with a message that said, have you got any jobs? And the first line of the message, all the way through to the end of the message, I can quite honestly say, of all the sales messages that I've received, from all of the people who target me on LinkedIn and in email, it is in the top 3 for the worst pieces of outreach I have ever received. But thankfully, the person who owns that business quite rightly was saying on LinkedIn, one shouldn't have to track things and be able to measure the performance of people if you trust them. And clearly this consultant in his employ, who claims to have 5 years of experience, no one is tracking to actually look at how good is your outreach. No one is supporting that person to help them to get better from a sales perspective, because there's no way that message would have been allowed to have been sent if it had been read by a manager who was managing that person to help to be able to develop their performance, and perhaps had a simple metric, a KPI, which was how much outreach is taking place and how much response is coming back. Because the relationship between the two should be a fair indication of, are we targeting the right people on the right day with the right message and making it easy for them to be able to respond. And if we don't have a KPI that helps us to be able to do that, then you're just doing marketing in the dark. You're just doing sales activity in the dark. And the only feedback that you're getting is nothing. And I chose not to respond to that message because kind of what's the point? The guy's working in a business where they don't value things like feedback because they don't track things like performance metrics. But hey, that's their choice. And I know this makes me sound really opinionated, but it's my podcast. It's for me to talk about what I feel is going to be of most value. And I have to say, getting your KPIs right as a business owner, getting your KPIs right as a recruiter, I feel is integral to helping you to be able to navigate the marketplace of today. And it will help you to become stronger and have a better business, whatever the future marketplace looks like. So if we look at what good KPIs are, in my opinion, good KPIs, in my opinion, are relationships between two numbers. And often the relationship between those two numbers is the relationship between an input device and an output device. So you think about that dude who sent me that message on LinkedIn and basically said, have you got any jobs? Which isn't a particularly eloquent way for a person with 5 years experience to go about doing their outreach. But hey, the input device is he sent one message. The output device is 0 responses. And I'm sure that scales, right? I'm sure that message that he sent to me, because it had 0 personalization in it, because he clearly hadn't looked at my profile, There's no way he went, oh, this guy is definitely a good prospect for me. It wasn't a one-to-one thing. So I would expect that based upon the message that was sent to me and the lack of personalization within it, it probably went to somewhere in the region of 100 people. So we now have input device 100. 100 messages go out. We then look at the response rate. And we start by looking at the response rate of how many replies did we get. So if he had 5 replies from 100 messages, which I highly doubt, but let's say he did, 5 replies from 100 messages, he now has a 5% response rate to his outreach. The relationship between the two numbers, i.e. the 5%, becomes the KPI. And that doesn't now create a target, because as soon as something you measure becomes a target, it starts to fail as being a measure. We see that in the NHS. We can see that there have been measures in the NHS, like waiting times, that have become targets. And the moment they become targets, they're no longer valuable measures, because people are now chasing the target, not seeking to improve the measure. So they are finding creative ways to be able to ensure that wait times are being reduced because it is a target, not using the wait times as a measure to look at the quality of clinical work that is being done, or the experience that is being provided to the patients, or to the potential reduction of things like negligence. So as we've seen more and more targets being set in the NHS that revolve around things that were initially measures, we are seeing an increase in the number of negligence cases, and that level of litigation is probably costing more than any of the benefits of actually achieving the targets in the first place. So without getting too political here, people, when you decide as a business owner, when you decide as a recruiter, I am going to start to set myself a target on this. Be really mindful as to what the impact of creating a target has on someone's perceptions of the value of the number. So if, for example, we said, right, the target is 10% conversion, 100 messages needs to get 10 replies, some people may try and fudge the system and start to create methods to be able to report in a way that shows that the target is being achieved, whilst actually what is being compromised is the measure, because not everything is being declared. Maybe some things will be sent and not logged on a CRM system, and I've seen people do that when job fill becomes a target. Jobs have only been put on the system when they got filled, and the time from putting the job on to the invoice being sent ends up being like 2 hours. So we need to be mindful of what behaviours we're looking to influence and what we could accidentally influence, and more than anything, think about the generation of a KPI is to help us to be able to look at the performance of an individual whilst conducting an activity that we would consider to be meaningful to help us to be able to grow our business or maintain a level of productivity that helps us to ensure that we are profitable. So if you look at another KPI, it may be that we have a KPI which is CVs that convert into interviews. So the input is 10 CVs got sent, and the output is 5 interviews got arranged, so we have a 50% conversion. As we start to look at the relationship between our inputs and our outputs, we can create an agile dashboard of what we would consider to be the most meaningful KPIs, key performance indicators, that are most relevant to the individual who we are talking to, or the individual who we are measuring, including self. And when you give somebody a portfolio of somewhere in the region of 3 to 5 KPIs, there will be other data that you have access to. We don't have to go through all of that data with every single person simply because some of that data is important to someone else. Each individual within a business may have their own focused set of KPIs that will have the most meaningful impact on their own productivity. And then there are these other things that I would like to call standards. They get misappropriated or mistitled as KPIs, and I think this is sometimes where the trauma can come from. Like when we say, in our business, we would expect it to be a standard that every 360-degree consultant is able to have 20 meaningful business conversations every week. And those are sales calls. But if we define that as being a standard, it's not a KPI because it doesn't really indicate any performance, but it shows an achievement of a standard, and that standard, the quality of it is owned by the individual. They could choose to do 10 meaningful conversations and then roger in 10 less than meaningful conversations to help them to be able to hit their number. They own the quality of it. But when we set it as a standard, it becomes an expectation. It's an expectation in terms of a behavior set. It's a standard as an expectation in terms of an attitude. So I wouldn't call that a KPI. I would have a set of standards. This is what we expect each person of this level of capability, at this level of seniority, in this particular job to be able to achieve on a weekly basis as a set of standards. And because it becomes that set of standards, and because everyone buys into it, it has some self-accountability to it, and everyone knows the purpose as to why it is set at 20 and not 18 and not 25. The KPIs, the performance indicators, those have more agility, and those are specifically chosen based upon what is going to be of greatest benefit for the individual to focus on to help them to be able to achieve goals, objectives, and stay focused on priorities. So if the priority is to be able to create customer retention, so if we decide, right, we want to ensure that we are keeping these crown jewel accounts, one of the KPIs we might look at is what percentage of the people who we've hired in that business have we completed a process of aftercare with and met face to face. Or we might look at it and say, well, let's look at those accounts that we want to be able to maintain as our crown jewel accounts, and let's focus on the speed at which we are delivering on them. Let's look at the average time to hire, because if we can decrease the average time to hire, we can become more impactful for the customer. So as you start to pick the measures that you feel would be of greatest value, they indicate something that is going on behaviourally, which is the person's performance. And that's the thing that I think gets lost in translation. So as a summary, if you don't have a meaningful set of KPIs, which is based around the relationships between two numbers, good KPIs, in my opinion, the majority of the time end up being percentages. It's not let's arrange 5 interviews a week. It's not let's do 20 sales calls a week. If you want those are standards. Those are behavioural standards. The KPIs are the conversion of CVs to interviews. The KPIs are the percentage of jobs that are exclusive, or the KPI is the percentage of jobs which have received a minimum of 3 CVs within 24 hours of the job being registered. The KPIs become something that helps you to be able to coach somebody to greater standards of productivity, to greater standards of revenue generation, whatever it is that is the metric that you think is most important. And just as a final thought, for any of you who are listening, who are in businesses that proudly say you have 0 KPIs, I'm sure you do. I'm sure that there are unspoken KPIs that even if as a business owner, it is something as simple as cash conversion and cash at the bank, debtor days, something that actually helps you to be able to maintain a real business. And if you don't, then really you're relying on economic conditions and each individual's own ability to self-coach, self-manage, self-assess and achieve consistent performance, which makes them a very rare beast. And if you're a consultant and you're currently in a position where you are feeling as though you need to produce better results, if you are lacking clients or jobs, or you're not getting enough traction and things are moving too slowly and interviews aren't happening, or too many CVs are being rejected, or the temp jobs that you're getting are too short in duration and therefore it's very difficult to be able to get the momentum to hit your number, think about what would be the KPIs that would help me to be able to look at the inputs and the outputs that will make the biggest difference to my ongoing happiness. And when you start to see KPIs as being the route to ongoing happiness rather than the turmoil of being allegedly micromanaged, then you'll start to embrace them for what they truly are, which is a vehicle to enlightenment. So look, whatever your thoughts are on what I've said, I would love to hear your feedback. I hope that within what I've shared, you can feel that there is a definite case for good quality KPIs, and that there is a definite case for being able to set some behavioural standards for self and perhaps for others, and that without meaningful KPIs showing you where your true performance actually lies, life becomes more difficult to be able to get better. And just share a thought for that guy who sent me that message. 5 years experience working in recruitment, sending what I would consider to be low grade, low impact, verging on embarrassing messages without any measure in place to help that individual to be able to make a better decision as to what he does next week because of what didn't happen this week. And when I go back through my messages on LinkedIn, that is the 4th message in a row that that individual has sent to me, with very little change in terms of substance, with very little change in terms of tone, and with very little change in terms of goal. Got any jobs? What about now? What about now? Have you got any jobs? And at some point, that feedback, unless 99 people went back and said, hey, my friend, here is a job, and I'm in the minority, but I don't think I am, you'd think that that feedback itself would make you want to slow down and think, what's actually going on here? How come I'm doing so much outbound and getting so little back in return? And then suddenly that person is analysing something called a KPI in a business that says, we don't need that if we are adult and autonomous. And he would probably benefit from that being something he spoke to another, perhaps a manager, about in a little bit more depth, to talk out loud and to be able to unpack it, and maybe to start to set some goals as to what could be done differently to start to be able to change the outcome that he so clearly wants. He definitely seems to want some jobs. So hopefully this week will be his week. Have fun, work hard, see you on next week's episode.